Hey guys, we are here at the next episode of Perdue's Perspective, and to follow up what was a bit of a controversial one last week, but needed to be addressed, we have an incredible guest here today, Jim McMurtry. If you guys have not heard his story, this is going to be the episode to listen to because I think all Canadians need to know this story to really have a grasp as to what's happening in Canada. We know there's economic issues, but especially when it comes to cultural issues, this is a big topic that needs to be addressed and what's going on with our public education system. So I'll allow Jim to introduce himself, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, hi. It's really great to be with you, Zachary. And so I'm a teacher. 4.5 years ago, I made the mistake of being truthful. Awesome. And I paid for it ever since I was walked out and both classroom and career. And so the thing that's maybe most interesting to people about me is the fact that I didn't take a knee. I didn't accept that I was going to find a way back into the classroom by doing what they expect of employees, that show remorse, say you did something wrong in some way, that you're going to be better and that you understand the feelings of all the people concerned to a greater extent, and you won't do it again and all that kind of stuff. So I've taken a different tack. I really feel that we've come to a point, and certainly during peak woke of about again 4.5 years ago,
Yep.
of the telling children that they're in the wrong body, of telling children to talk about their sexuality, for pronouns or for discussions on sexual positions. Children bringing drag queens to have kindergarten kids sit on their knees, and then all the race stuff, telling darker skinned kids that their whole lives are going to be determined by their skin color, and the same with white kids are always going to feel great shame, and every time they open their mouths, they're going to microaggress whoever they're talking to. Then there's issues to do with censorship, issues to do with the defamation of the dead, of changing history, creating an image of Canada in the past that I don't understand,
Yeah.
tearing down statues, getting rid of art, and so forth. They academically they've gone against the values, things like fair play and competition and truth. And that's basically the indigenous thing that they, daily land acknowledgements. But what most upsetting for me is when they telling kids things that aren't true about our past. In
Yeah.
residential schools, I know I don't really know your audience, and I don't know you that well, Jack, outside of the fact that you've already made a lovely impression on me. And that is that residential schools, like anything, they're not easily summed up in a few words by
Yeah.
saying calling them genocidal, as all parliamentarians in Canada, October 27th, 2022. So I think residential schools were generally very good. They were wanted by Indigenous people. They are a refuge for orphans and others that were neglected or abused in the household or were starving. People just don't know residential schools. They've been,
Yeah.
led by the nose by Pied Pipers in political office and in the media, who are only interested in virtue signaling. They're not at all interested in getting history right.
Yeah.
So I'm fighting it, and I'm never going to teach again because I've fought it. But I've gained a following on X, and I've written articles, written a book, and I think I've been in documentary films, one seen by millions, another one's coming out, involving people in British Columbia where I live, on the idea that there's a whole industry, reconciliation
Oh,
industry.
yes.
We're making a lot of money from these lies, and it's pitting one group of Canadians against another. So
Yep.
I don't blame. I'm not blaming individuals, but there's certain groups, particularly the elites in Canada, that are really taking Canada in a wrong direction. And I'm calling them out. I think that these people are, to some extent, they're criminal. I think anybody that changes the past and doesn't allow children to see history as it was,
Yeah.
is doing something that's fraudulent. And then, of course, it's manipulative and it's brainwashing and it's indoctrination. It's all these terrible things. Just give the kids the facts, give them values, and let them come to their own conclusions. And hopefully, they won't repeat the mistakes that we and our ancestors made.
No, that's exactly it. And there's a lot to unpack there, but so much of what you address is what I talked about in the episode I did last week, where when we look at the context of residential schools, why they're created, yes, like, and that's one of the biggest things to quote different chiefs and different people who had positive experiences as students at the schools. These were things that were encouraged by and demanded for from the Indians or indigenous people themselves at these times, that they wanted their children to become educated and to be able to use that dirty word, assimilate, to assimilate into the larger society. And especially when we know what's happening, like we're talking the 1880s forward, especially, this is a time of mass immigration from across Europe. Assimilation was happening across the board. It's the Industrial Revolution. And as I talked about last week, is even down in the South in the United States, when you had the blacks coming out of slavery and newly emancipated, you had leaders like Booker T. Washington preaching the importance of a vocational education to be able to then be a part of the larger society. And this was happening across the board within North America. We were trying to get assimilation and grow the country because change was happening in so many ways. And one of the things I often pose people is, again, we try to put ourselves in the context of the time. If we weren't going to pursue residential schools as a way to try and assimilate both groups, what was the better path then? What's the other option? Because a lot of people don't like to look at it that way. They can't place themselves in those times. And I think I haven't had in one of my university classes, I asked one of the professors, like it was an article that you had shared before on Twitter, and it was going over how certain chiefs had then demanded that they wanted the residential schools to stay open. When they had votes on it, they would stay vote to stay open. And he, even though he was one of those more politically active on the left professors, he even then had to confess, say, well, yes, it was the only way for them to get a formal way of education or a proper education. So that's why I'd vote to keep them open. And there's just so much context and trade-offs that are just not told about these schools, let alone all the lies that are then purported, which we can get into. Because I think there's a lot with regarding the schools. Like you said, you can't simplify them. It's a 110-year plus history, so nothing is an absolute. It's too much to simplify, and nothing's black or white. It's always varying shades of gray. So I think we can get into that later. But what I'd also want to focus on is for more your story, so the audience can be more familiar for those who don't know specifically what happened. When was it in 2021 when you were discussing residential schools with your class, and how did that day play out exactly, so people know?
Well, I have to say, I'm just Salvage, you just respond to one thing you said there. When people say,
Yeah, sorry.
colonialism is wrong and Western education was wrong, and bringing in animals and which of course lead to some diseases. But really, what is the alternative? The
Yeah,
indigenous people today are still in Western modern capitalist
yeah,
education centers. They're not living in any way as they did in the past. They're not living
exactly.
in, in wood structures, where there's nothing but a gape in the top of the whatever, what big house, long house,
Yeah, I know what you
teepee,
mean.
whatever, for water to come, for water to come in, because water's going to come in, and bugs on the ground. Like, I just don't understand how people can say that there was nothing good about colonialism.
Yeah,
I would say colonialism is the best that we have. It's the
yeah,
best, and if there's something better, then let's adopt it and make ourselves better. This idea that these, I don't know how to describe them, but the very small-minded people,
yeah,
and I would say people who are not so much small-minded, truthfully, but are just openly deceptive and thinking that they can tell students, particularly in university, we need to go back to the past.
yeah,
Well, okay, so your kid's got leukemia, your mother needs open heart surgery, or you want to get your kid to, baseball practice, but you're not going to use a car, you're going to use a canoe, or you're going to walk, and you're not going to heat your house, and you're not going to worry about hygiene. I just don't, none of it
yeah,
makes any sense. The people in residential schools who worked back then gave the kids food, enough food, as opposed to, in many cases, not enough food. They gave them an education. They opened their eyes to the world. They gave them love, and many of these kids didn't have it. They gave them a new culture. They added to what they knew. This idea that education's a zero sum game, that every time you say something to Zachary, I'm going, oh, okay, Zachary said the earth is round. Therefore, I've lost the belief. I've lost the belief that it's flat. And he's taking away from me something. No, no, you've improved my thinking. You've added
yeah,
to my thinking. And so my story and I'm not going to go very long here, because I think there are people that do know it, but I was teaching. I was asked one day when the Kamloops story came out, 215 dead children in the form of remains were found
Yeah.
in a mass grave. And now they're changing it. You know how Orwell talked about how they're
Yep.
changing language, war is
In
peace,
many ways, yeah.
ignorance is strength, freedom is slavery. Like I said that wrong. It's freedom anyhow. The order I
No, I
said
get
it.
you. Yeah.
But the idea is the language. The language gets changed. So now they're saying,
Yep.
oh no, look at denials like McMurtry because all they said was they're suspected unmarked graves, and well, it's hard to argue it's something that's potential or suspected. But that's not what they said at the time. 4.5 years ago, they were telling kids at my school and all around my school district, and turns out all around Canada, that these kids were murdered by the teachers and buried. Some were as young as 3, made no sense. They were buried by 6-year-old classmates late at night. They were saying they were tortured on hooks, hanged, put in incinerators, including the babies that came from the girls after they were impregnated by priests. Queen Elizabeth the
Insane.
second and her husband visited in 1964 this very reserve in Kamloops, and they kidnapped 10 kids that were never seen again. And most of these residential schools, Zachary, were right in the middle of a reserve. They
Yeah.
had cooks and cleaners and dormitory supervisors who were from the village, who are from the reserve, who are indigenous. They had teachers. Kamloops had 4 teachers that were indigenous and a principal that was indigenous. How is all this murder going around? They've never found the name of a missing child. No
Yeah.
one's saying in Kamloops, oh, by the way, yeah, there were 215 kids that were taken away by the Pied Piper, 100 years ago. And we always wondered what happened to them. But nobody until now thought that they could be on the school
Really.
grounds under where the orchard used to be. And so, and of course, they're not digging, which makes it more difficult to accept that
Yep.
we're defaming these dead priests and nuns, but we're not willing to try and at least honor them by saying, well, we're going to excavate and we're going to find if it's true, then they should be.
100%.
If they're still alive, and many of them are still alive, then they should, answer to the law. So there's so much that's wrong. So they walked me out physically out of my classroom in school. I got to the bottom and I said, I think it's going to be easier for you guys if you let me talk to the principal because I'm not leaving unless you do. Principal said something inane. He said, well, the kids didn't know you. The kids that I was a substitute teacher that day and teaching calculus 12 and they weren't, they didn't expect you to say the things that you did. And I'm going, well, you told all the teachers in the school to talk about residential schools.
Yeah.
The news had just broken again of the 215. So I did absolutely nothing wrong, and I'll never teach again.
It's absolutely insane. I think one of the biggest things that I'm even curious about, for what you can talk about, because I know the process is still ongoing with what you deal with schools, is a lot of people would wonder, like, as part of being a teacher, you have a great career set out for you. You'd always obviously been working as a teacher for a long time. You might be close to retirement. You have your pension set up. How does that work? Like, would they strip you of your pension if you're able to talk about that? How does that play out now?
Yeah, yeah. You know what? There's a lot there. I want to just this is helpful to me. I'm not your ordinary teacher in one sense. Okay, I'm probably worse than most teachers, but in one sense, I am distinct. My father was the Chief Justice of Ontario. He knew his history. His mother was an amateur historian.
Nice.
And so I was raised in a household because my grandmother lived with us. Um, I was raised in a household that I learned a lot about Canadian history. So, and then I went and did a PhD from the University of Toronto. Now, as a white male, it's not easy to get a university job. Anyhow, and I kind of gave up after applying a little bit, and I ended up falling in love with high school teaching, particularly the younger grades, because they weren't so cynical. They're more interested in what a
Yeah.
teacher had to say. Yeah. Grade 8, grade 9, they kind of really loved me. And for a time, I was a principal overseas, but most of my career has just been in a classroom. But I know history.
Yeah.
I really do know history compared to most. I'm credentialed. I've written all sorts of articles on this. So I knew instinctively, but because I was the first to say publicly in Canada 4.5 years ago, no, the kids died from disease, those that died, some accidents, some fires.
Yeah.
Um, and, um, and, and that was it. That was it. oh my gosh. And then afterwards, I started saying to people, there are no graves there. That they didn't bury the kids at the school. Anyhow, nobody was interested in listening to me. So I've lost everything. I really have lost everything in time that my wife hasn't been able to work, and now both of us are getting older because my wife's got an illness, and so did it hit us over the head financially? Yes. Can they take away what money a teacher has put aside and pension and savings and so forth? No, they can't. They certainly would if they could,
Yeah.
because I'm the enemy. I'm the enemy. It's not just that I'm a right of center right now, Christian, white, old, able body,
Yeah. The
whatever,
whole list of the yeah.
heterosexual, whatever. I'm everything that's just accursed, particularly, the pallor of my skin. And and yet, and yet I'm just a regular guy who wants to get it right for kids in the classroom. And
Yeah.
I just didn't meet any teacher in my day who was lying to me. If everyone felt that, we challenged teachers but teachers didn't do that. They didn't propagandize.
Yeah.
I mean, it really, I don't, this is new to me. I know in the 50s, McCarthyite and so forth, I'm a child of the 70s. I was born in 59, but my schooling was really through the 70s when I was starting to become awake, going through high school. And they didn't lie to you. In fact, the young generation was knocking the adults for their previous lies. Oh, you're
Yep.
racist, you're sexist, and they were, and you're in war all the time, and you're and 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 there was just this sense that young people were had a better idea of the future. And now the young generation is kind of dried up.
Yep.
It's just sort of lost itself because life's gotten tougher. So I'm not knocking young people. It's tough to make it in this world. I've got a house. How many young people are going to have a house? Like, I mean, it's just not
Yeah.
because
No, it's a sad truth.
when
Yeah.
I was young, it was easy. It was easy to buy a house. My parents bought their first house for $24,000 in the heart of Toronto, and
Yep.
that house now is worth 100 times more. Well, like that's not fair to the people two generations or three generations later. It's just not fair.
Yeah.
But my point is this: that schools didn't used to do that. Teachers got it there and did their best, and now they don't want that. They want teachers to be like soldiers for the next communist revolution, walk around with an orange book
Yeah.
saying, this is what white people did to indigenous or black people, whomever, back in time. They're monsters. And I'm thinking, well, okay, give me an example of where, because if you're using slavery, for example, Ontario is one of the first places in the world and arguably the first. And it's set in 1793 with an act to abolish slavery.
Yeah.
Unbelievable accomplishments by early Canadians to rid the world of slavery, of misogyny, of of so many of the ills and racism. My father, as I said, was a judge. He was also a politician. The things that he worked hard to do, so all Canadians were with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, bringing back the Constitution in 1982. That's when it was
Yeah.
really 91. But my point is, I come from a family where everything was about good values. And now to see all the work that my father and the people before him did to be tainted with one similar brush of a thing is these people were racist. And then the people that come in today, like Trudeau or Carney, and they say, oh, well, follow me. I know what's right. And you look at them and you go, my gosh, your values are deplorable.
Yeah.
I mean, they're deplorable. Like how can you? And again, I won't go into different things because I don't want to upset anybody. But I mean, it's deplorable for Indigenous people to tell them they're perpetual victims. They're
Yes.
not. They're a proud, decent people who had a hard time getting by in a rough landscape and a rough climate. Give them a break. Stop telling them that only you know the answer for them. And the answer is to tell them that they were only ever victims.
Yes. No, that's exactly it. And I think Oh, you touched on so many things that are just so important to address. And this self-cannibalization of our own country's history. We're now, I think it's the Toronto District School Board is now taking down John A. Macdonald as being on school names. As Ryerson University did, they removed Egerton Ryerson from the campus name and now changed it to Toronto Metropolitan University. Which, even when you go through the logic of what they're trying to argue historically, makes no sense. It's insane how we're having this negative view of our own country's history. And you're right, for the next generation, like I have a nephew who's in kindergarten now, and I think for people like him who are going to have these ideas perpetrated at school and constantly pushed on them, it's just not good at all. And it's going to breed resentment, sadly, because on one hand, you have kids who have had generations, like my nephew would be sixth generation Canadian. He has deep roots into this country, and we came over as Irish immigrants, so we had nothing to do with even the creation of residential schools. But almost like in some ways, as indigenous groups are all lumped into being one and the same, they don't realize the distinctions between them historically. It's the same for Europeans. We're just all lumped in the same category and treated as the conquistadors were no different from the British and how they went about settling the Americas. And it makes no sense. But
The
it, yeah.
conquistadors in Mexico, called the Aztecs, subjugated and tortured to death,
Yeah.
tens and hundreds of thousands. They subjugated 313 tribes and decimated them. And this idea that they're the baddies and the Aztecs are the goodies. But the one person said something that really kind of, there's of course there's lots of things that can strike one about this, but I'm going to stop there. I've lost it. You keep on going. But there was
No
something you
worries.
said
But
that made me
if you
think
remember,
that
just
really.
interrupt me. No worries. But that's exactly it. It's this victim mentality that's then pushed on also like indigenous kids that are growing up today. That same professor I mentioned earlier, I had this back and forth, and he was not happy with me. But I went over when it comes to like different sports teams using different cultures for their logos and team names, how it's only indigenous tribes or indigenous teams. Like if we took even the Washington Redskins as a far example, which now there's groups pushing for they want it reinstated, to even like the Cleveland Indians or the Edmonton Eskimos for Canadian football. It's only those groups that are complaining about. When we have the Minnesota Vikings, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, no one says anything. It's just part of the large assimilation that we all look for. And I even said, like, the same if we have, because my high school I mentioned to you previously, Huron Heights, is that we are the Huron Heights Warriors after the Huron Warriors. And I remember saying to him, is we used to enjoy doing that before all this politically correct stuff really came into the high school, and they had to change a lot of that team name. And we stopped doing the mascot a long time ago. But even just logos we had all had to change. And I said it's a shame because these were warrior cultures, and I mean that in a positive way. Just as we talk about the Greek Spartans or other fighting cultures like the Highland Scots, it's something to be proud of and honorable when it comes to your ancestors. And now, like you said, kids are taught that their ancestors were purely victims. There's no pride in their history. When I think that's how history should be taught, it's always varying shades of gray. There's many tragedies that have happened. It's not one absolute or the other, but we have progressed to such a better point. There's heroes of every group. Like that's what needs to be acknowledged and I think taught to the kids is it's the positive side of things.
Yeah, so I remember what I was going to say, and
Yep.
and I got distracted as well when you were assimilation because the idea of assimilation being bad is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard,
Yeah.
and that's what people are telling kids in school. Because what you want to do is you want to simulate knowledge, you want to assimilate
Exactly.
everything good. So if someone in China is making really good, shoes, or somebody wherever
Yeah.
in Guatemala is making really good food, why wouldn't you want to assimilate that into your culture?
Yeah.
Like this idea that you need to freeze a culture. But the point that I really want to make in this is, and you made me think of it. So they're taking kids in school and saying, you white kid, European kid, you're responsible for residential schools, which were horrible. And of course, the truth is they weren't at all horrible. And these kids, but what I really want to get after is the kids go, well, I wasn't around 100 years ago or 150 years ago and my ancestors are part indigenous and yes, I'm mostly Polish, but we were nobody in the family was here. But also, so in other words, the people that they're wanting to demonize in school, the little European kids, they're not at all any responsible for the sins of other people's children long ago
Yeah.
or other people's ancestors. But the victims, the people that are going, oh, the black people and who were, you were made slaves here, and the indigenous people, you were, treated terribly in residential schools. They weren't.
Yeah.
They weren't around 150 years ago.
Yeah.
That kid's 8 years old.
It's exactly it.
What the hell are you talking about? They're not victims of anything. And the other 8 year old is not a perpetrator of anything. They're just 8 year old kids who
Yeah.
have a right to learn about history. That we've allowed these monsters right across our society to manipulate children. And the very worst is the gender stuff. Without going into it, but just say
No, I
one thing.
get you though.
What could be worse than taking a little boy or girl and confusing him or her sexually? And then when they feel they've got a kid on the hook, because what progressive people want to do is every time religious people do it too. I mean, all people do it, all groups. Military wants to get Converse. Everybody's after. Businesses want to sell you a car.
Yeah.
They want to get people in to watch the movie in the theater. Everybody's trying to con you, right? That's the world. But it's particularly egregious when it's a school with children that are sent there by parents trusting the institution that they're going to do it's in the best interest of the child. And we're saying to them at the high school level, they say, you find some depressed kid who's got no friends or whatever, who's got no different clothes, who clearly is hungry a lot of the time, or is, drugged up a lot, kids with a lot of problems. And they start getting these discussions and they finally go, well, have you ever thought about your sexuality? The moment they get someone on the line who's going, well, I'm not, that's something I'm confused about, because frankly, a lot of teenagers are confused about
Yeah.
sexuality. So they do have, there is a percentage of kids that are easy pickings for these
100%.
groomers at school who do exist. And they bring them into a club, because almost every high school I know now has these clubs. They different names for them, Rainbow Club or whatever, but they have different names for them. And they bring the kid in, and it's free pizza and there's free pop and things that matter to kids who don't have much
Yeah.
money, or kids generally, going free lunch, free this, wow. And not the crap my mom packed me, or I don't have any, I forgot to pack myself lunch. And they sit in there, and then they're worked on. Like, what the heck are we
Yeah.
doing? The heck are we doing? I mean, it's incredible. So with history, and in my particular case, they couldn't, they just want to they want to destroy me. Recently, my board is threatening me with a lawsuit. So it's not enough to take away my livelihood and not give me a
Yeah.
salary for the last 4.5 years. Never again can I teach anywhere. But they're wanting to take even more. They're wanting to take away, presumably, because I don't, what are they going to go after? My house? They're going to go after, like, it's just unbelievable. Why? Because they know what I'm saying is right.
Yeah.
They know that you don't manipulate, exploit children for political advantage. And that's what they're doing.
No, that's exactly it. They only try to silence you because you are having an effect. If everyone in the society saw you as a crackpot, then they could just let you be a crackpot because everyone comes to the same conclusion. But because your message and story has a serious impact on everyday people, that's why they try to silence you. And it's sad, but that is the reality we face. And like one of the things you mentioned earlier, which I think is very important, and it goes for any subject, whether it's residential schools, colonial history here, but any subject. How responsible am I for the sins of my father? Like it makes no sense, but that is what happens for people who do try to say that, well, your ancestors did this and that, whether it's accurate or not. Even if they did, how am I responsible for that? Just as it happened to your ancestors, but that's not you. And one of the things that I was raised as a kid, very young to be able to understand, is to be able to have these conversations in a mature way, is through my parents. One of our good family friends, they were of German descent, and the wife, Monica, her father served under like in Nazi Germany in the military there, and my grandfather served in the Canadian Navy, and he was torpedoed and has a whole story there. And even my great uncle Ernie, he was taken as a POW by the Germans, but we're able to sit down as adults and still talk about our stories because we didn't do that to each other. That was our parents. That was their time. It's a larger story to understand, but you don't hold it against someone who had nothing to do with it. And that's always boggled my mind as to how it's portrayed in schools this way, as though, yeah, somehow the children, like you said, are 8 years old, if even that, are somehow responsible for things of 100 years ago, let alone even 20 years ago.
So I'm sitting listening to you. You sound incredibly bright and articulate, and I obviously subscribe fully to everything that you just said. There's superintendents right across the country who are being of school boards who are be paid up to 400, 500,000 a year when you
Yeah.
consider all the perks, paid all this money to lie to kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. to tell things that aren't
Yeah.
true about history, that aren't true about all sorts of things. Kids aren't born in the wrong body. Skin color doesn't determine one's life prospects. Um, this isn't indigenous land. It is
Yeah.
not indigenous land. What the land is being given to them is indigenous land. But where I sit right now, where you sit, is not indigenous land. Legally, it's not indigenous land. It is ceded land,
Yeah.
or it was one, and anyhow, and man, you can make other arguments as well that it's really nobody's land. Whatever you want to say, it's Canada's land.
Yeah.
Belongs to all Canada because the reality is the Canadian government can take away my land. You know, they're putting a highway through or whatever,
Yeah.
and they have to compensate for me. But no, but this idea to listen to these people that run our institutions and the people in universities are teaching young adults, and you have to pay all this money because you want to get a job and you want to make it in this world. And you got to listen to these people say these inanities.
Yeah.
And you go, whoa, whoa, none of what you're saying makes any sense whatsoever. And yet it's being said. Now, just one other thing about indigenous people. I'm going to say two quick things.
Yeah, of course.
One with slavery in residential schools. So the first thing about slavery is when they go on slavery, and Trudeau's talking about Canada's history of slavery, and we have to do better. You're going, my gosh, if you're going to blame the European people for slavery, um, good, because some Europeans participated in it long
Yeah.
ago, so that's fine. But you also have to mention that the number of the tens of thousands of British sailors that went around the world and
Yes.
died trying to end slavery. So
Yes.
that's part of the picture. When the slave traders got to the coast of Africa, that's as far as they had to go
Yeah.
in most cases because they would be dead if they stepped off their boat and walked in and started
Yep.
grabbing people. The reality is they were very sophisticated trade organizations, kingdoms, and so forth. Slavery was a black on black phenomenon,
Yep.
and for the most part, it was in the end they were sold to a middleman who took them to a different part of the world, and so that's part of the story. So this idea of and of course I'm Irish, and the name my name's Irish, and the number of Irish that were taken in the African slave trade, which generally people call the Arab
Yeah.
slave trade, and exceeds the number that were ever taken in this transatlantic
Yeah.
slave trade. So my people were victimized, and my people were victimized by my other people because I'm part Irish and I'm part Viking. So the Vikings would take the.
Yep.
So my point is, none of us has obviously one lineage. We're all a mixture. We're all related to people of all sides and everything. So this idea that you're going to lump one group, how silly. And with indigenous people, just with Huron. So you said you went to a school that has the word Huron in it, and then the Huron used to live in great number right across Ontario, and they don't anymore. Okay.
Yep.
And those that are calling themselves Huron aren't really Huron. Okay. I mean that. The Huron has escaped to Quebec City, and many of them live near what Loretteville. And anyhow, they are completely extinguished, annihilated, babies thrown on fires, nobody left alive by the Iroquois.
Yep.
Now we call the Iroquois First Nation today and give them all sorts of privileges. I had to pay a lot of money for my kids' tuition in university, and I have to pay a lot in taxes, as do they today. And the Iroquois don't because they're First Nation when they didn't even live here. My
Yeah.
people have been longer in Ontario, in Canada, than the Iroquois. The Iroquois didn't come in here until after the War of Independence in 17, as you know, really well, we could argue 1776, 79, but it was really in the 1780s and 90s. And so this
Yeah.
idea that the people they're calling First Nation aren't first, folks. My people, the Vikings, were here 1,000 years ago, and the Inuit didn't come over until about 400 or 500 years ago. And the Sioux came over. The Sioux came over in 1876, 77, and
Yeah.
and yet they've got all sorts of reserves in southern Saskatchewan and calling themselves First Nations and Indigenous. And the only people who are not Indigenous to any place in the world, you look at the United Nations maps of the world for Indigenous people, every country in the world has Indigenous people,
Yeah.
except for Western Europeans. There's no such thing as an Indigenous Western European. Oh, okay. So white European people are the only ones who can't have a past.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just so upsetting. I would never want to argue. if someone were to say to me that we should have special rights in Canada for people who are like me, I would be on the vanguard of fighting those people.
I agree.
I would say no kid in my classroom matters less because of the color of his skin, because of his or her ancestry, which people don't even know because people's ancestry, once again, is mixed. We
Yeah.
all come from the same families. You have to go back 100,000 years. So what do when they start speaking like this? They go, "Oh, McMurtry's the racist." And I'm going, "No, I'm the one who's not the racist."
That's just it. You're trying to preach equality, and somehow that makes you the racist now, and that's what's crazy. It's one of my favorite authors, Thomas Sowell. It's exactly what he says, that if you were to preach for equality in the 1960s, you'd be a radical. In the 90s, you'd be a leftist, and you'd be a racist today. Like it's just the sad reality we live in. And like you said with the land acknowledgements, there's two parts to it that just never clicked with me. Where one, it's completely illogical because it's only here that we do that. Like if we look even when Columbus came, not 40 years before, the Ottomans took over Christian Constantinople, which is a historically Christian territory, but you never find Turkish people apologizing today for Istanbul being their capital. So it's things like that make no sense. And as even my dad pointed out to me before, it's also like a slap in the face to a lot of these indigenous tribes say, well, we acknowledge this is your land. We're not going to give it back, but we're going to sit here, make ourselves feel good through virtual signaling that it's your land. Haha. Like it's nonsense no matter how you want to draw it up. But yeah.
Nah, 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 nah. It's your land, but
That's just it. And like you
and,
said
and and
too,
and I'm a better person because I'm a woke leftist saying that.
exactly. That's what it
And
does
and,
for so
and
many people.
You McMurtry, and you Zachary are these
Yep.
horrible white racist, whatever Trumpists, whatever you like.
Yeah.
This, I'm going. I don't like Trump. What are you talking about? I'm just a teacher.
Yeah.
I am just somebody who wants to get it right for kids. And you know what? Yeah, fire me. But they did made a mistake because
They did.
my audience, it used to be 30 bored kids 3 or 4 times a day, right? With their cell phones and compete.
Yep.
I compete with all sorts of things. They wanted to talk to their friends about what they're doing after school. Like it was hard to get through to anybody. And now I can put out things and again I'm part of a documentary put on by the British Telegraph that
Nice.
millions of people saw. So they haven't shrunk my classroom. They've made my classroom bigger.
Yep.
And so there you go, school districts. You can run teachers like me out, but you don't minimize this. And they said that was 1984. There's Emmanuel Goldstein, whether he was real or not, and he had these ideas that, Big Brother didn't like. But the funny thing was there, it didn't really matter if he existed or not because
Yep.
it was the idea that couldn't die.
That's
And
exactly
the
it.
idea that can't die here is something called truth. If there are 215 murdered children and
Yeah.
that's the story in
Yep.
that orchard at the school in Kamloops, then prove it to me
Yep.
and I'll believe you. I will believe you because I'm a man of science. And yet, of course, Trudeau is the guy who calls himself a man of science. Follow the science on COVID. And
Really.
and you go, well, what about following the science on Kamloops, where you can't prove someone's there unless you excavate.
Yep.
Secondly, you can't prove it was murder unless you do forensic. And you need to have the name of it. There has to be someone who actually lived there. I mean, to
Yeah.
know that even a body that belongs to the school. But if there's no kid missing from the school and there's no kid missing from the reserve, you got a problem scientifically, folks. And yet, most Canadians, Zachary, most Canadians went crazy 4.5 years ago.
Oh
And I'm
yes.
telling you, I was hiding from family members. I wasn't just hiding from friends and colleagues. I was
Yep.
hiding from family members. The anger against me was so great. That's how hysterical our society got then. And you saw it during the trucker convoy,
Yep.
you saw it during COVID, and we'll see it again and again because this is something in you get a mob, and all of a sudden you've got nice, normal people out there, like during the Stanley Cup riots in Vancouver, and going back what 30 years now. But the you got ordinary people that I know and taught participating in that riot who are now doctors and lawyers and doing well in society who are punching at people and throwing rocks and
Yeah.
at stores and stealing and like it's just a danger when people stop thinking for themselves.
Well, that's exactly there. Yeah, there's so many things. Like you said, this preach of diversity in general is just not a good thing because in again, to reference Thomas Sowell, but if we just look at diverse societies, it just doesn't bring about anything good. If we go over like the history of India or the history of the Balkans, it's unfortunately a lot of conflict there. And what else do you expect when you just have diversity for diversity's sake? And that's like before the word used to be balkanization until the 90s happened. So they had to switch their terms as like, there's so many things. It's political wordplay. And like I touched on in my last episode, it used to be that there was a genocide at the schools. Now it's been addressed that, of course, that's a specific term with a legal meaning. So they don't say it's a genocide, it's a cultural genocide. They just reinvent new terms as though to defend themselves. And it
Don't
makes
give them a
no
pass.
sense.
Don't give them a pass on that one, though, Zachary, because the Truth and Reconciliation report does speak to physical and biological genocide. So it's not just the people since who are changing the language who are lying to us. The people that wrote the Truth and Reconciliation report
Yeah.
lied to us. 80% of the testimonies to that commission were positive, but they, packaged it as something entirely different. So
Yeah.
can I be a diversity person for you? Can I just give me 10 seconds here? In a classroom, boys and girls, one of the things that I stand for is diversity. Diversity means you have to think like I think,
That's exactly it.
or you're out of my class. And you're a racist, and I don't want anything to do with you. The discussion, you're making me mad. Don't even open your mouth.
Yeah.
I'm walking away from you because I'm a diversity person. That's how it is. I don't get any conversations. I had a nice conversation with you because you're someone who's open minded.
Yeah.
I mean, I just contradicted you, Zachary. You're not mad at me. I said to you, it wasn't just cultural genocide. It was physical and biological genocide that they were pretending happened at residential schools. That's incredibly stupid.
Yeah.
And then every parliamentarian, again, October 27th, 2022, said Canada committed genocide. They didn't say I mean, it's cultural genocide.
They said
They
genocide.
said
Yeah.
genocide. And genocide means, if you look at the root, it means
Yeah.
killing of a whole group of people.
Yeah.
Genus. So this idea, so people are packaging all these things, and they're going to me, Jim over at residential go, oh, yeah, there are no bodies, there are no graves, or anything like that. They don't want to ever say I was right. They just go, well, there's not that, but they were horrible, and I'm
No,
going,
you're right. You're entirely right. And that's it. It's
they're
this.
horrible. They're
Yep.
going from one lie to
Yeah.
another, and they're going to run out one day. They're going to run out of lies. There's nothing good about putting people into group buckets and
Yeah.
saying this is how we're going to structure a society. We're going to say Indigenous people don't pay tuition, get free healthcare, get free this, that, and everything else, and some other poor kid is going to have to pay through his or her teeth to get a university education, and we're going to say that's right.
That's exactly. And really, especially to that point, I've had this same with that same professor and so many others, is it boils down to do you believe in equality under the law or not? And if you believe in maintaining these special privileges, okay, but at the same time, you can't be upset when you're naturally othered because you're othering yourself, and that's just how that response is going to be. And so yeah, it really is insane. I think in so many ways that we talked about and addressed a lot of stuff here is like all the either ignorance or just straight lying by omission when it comes to history is just absolutely insane to me. Like you talked about that, the warfare between like the Iroquois and the Huron and many other groups, and how that was a natural way of life. And this idea that with hunter-gatherer societies naturally, when it's tried to be taught as though, well, these societies like they would care for the elders to the greatest extent, the elders were everything. As you reach a certain age, when the tribe has to move on to a new location, if you can't physically move, you're being left behind, and that's the reality of it. Like especially when it comes to medical practices, all these things, there's just this fantasy land of want to pretend that the world was different back then when it really was, especially the further back we go for sanitary conditions, for everything. And so it really is just remarkable to me how a lot of these things are just portrayed and maintained. And unfortunately, it is the younger generation who's going to be brainwashed in some ways to believe things just are not true about their own country and its history and their ancestors.
Could you say something to me that I disagree with?
I'm trying here, man, honestly.
What is it? What is it? Come on, there's got to be something about me that I represent, or I've said, or even right in the last half an hour or so. There's got to be something that's wrong because I don't think there is, but I want to be tested. But nobody talks to me. I'm just this person who just nobody talks to me wherever I go. Because people are starting to know who I am. wherever I'm going, they just like I don't exist in that way. I'm a nice
Yeah.
person and they'll talk to me about my kids or grandkids or something, but they don't want to ever take me on with this. And I'm going, it's just such a lonely place. And yet
Yeah.
still around you, they're doing things like at hockey games, putting up 215 and
Yeah.
all the hockey players are standing there. Like, I mean, like, that was a couple of years ago, but my point is, it's just so absurd.
Yeah.
They've got these pride flags and they've got no color for white people and no color for heterosexuals and no color for Christians and no color for people that live in society, and they call it inclusive.
Yeah.
The pride flag. What could be wrong with the pride flag? Lots, folks. Lots. You don't talk about transsexuality or any sexuality with 8 year olds.
Yeah.
That's what's wrong. That's what's wrong. If you can't figure that out, then but anyhow, I can't. I every classroom I go into, every element I go in, I'm a basketball referee, this low paying nothing job. And then I go around in schools in the wintertime. And
Yeah.
I take it serious and I love it in schools and everywhere I'm in every wall and every classroom and in every gym. You've got all this, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and you just want to scream out, they don't mean it, kids. They're lying to you about everything. Get rid of the propaganda, what they should be putting up. I'm part French teacher. Do you know how hard it is to get kids to memorize French verbs?
Yeah.
I'm part history teacher. You know how hard it is for kids to understand, the French Revolution. I'm part
Yeah.
English teacher. You know how hard it is for kids to understand iambic pentameter in Shakespeare, and that's what Shakespeare is. Shakespeare is only brilliant because of its language.
Yeah.
His ideas are no better than anybody else's ideas. His language is incredible, the best writer ever, because everything he did was in song and
Yep.
unbelievable. And only, but not for all characters, too. Is this so incredibly structured and rich?
Yeah.
It's not easy to tell kids that. That's what you should be doing with your walls. You should be putting up things like the chemistry, table
Yeah.
or whatever. But they or the timetables. They just don't do what teachers used to do. They're just thinking school is about dressing kids in orange one day and pink the next day and rainbows the next day and brown and black and red. Like, I mean, there's so many colors right now. You fill their
Yeah.
heads, you don't tell them to think, and you say, okay, go home with your equity pack in the back, and for homework, write about how terrible residential schools were.
Yep.
You're screaming, going, they don't even know what residential school. My 3 year old grandson, 3 years old, just turned three, but he's got a really good memory. So he's able to come home and tell what the daycare teacher told him. And my daughter had to go and talk to their daycare center.
Yeah.
And he was saying to his mom, I'm really scared because I'm worrying about residential schools. Am I going to be kidnapped one day and have my hair cut off? They're saying that to a 3 year old. What do you
It's
mean? But
insane.
I thought they said they didn't. The parents wanted the kids to go to residential
Yeah.
schools, and if they cut kids' hair, that's because the kids had lice.
Yeah. No,
Like,
oh, I know. That's just it.
why can't you just say that, folks?
Well, I'd say even one of the biggest parts is omitted, which I had touched upon almost right out the gate when it came to the history of residential schools. By the time kids even were told, like you said, if there was a school on the reserve, they would just go to that school. It was only for typically very small communities where there was not a school on the reserve because they didn't have enough people to justify it, that then they'd go off to another school. But again, we had truancy laws in the rest of society at that point anyways. So that's what we did with our own kids. Just like if your kids stayed home now, they would have to go back to school. That like we just set that up. So if someone wants to argue against that, they're gonna have to discuss truancy laws as a whole. It's just it has to go back to the are you equal under the law or not? And it's just it becomes absolutely insane. So like even with the unfortunately like, the kids are political footballs, it's to make the teachers and those because the adults ruin everything for the kids and their innocence. It's to make them feel good that I'm making the kids think this way. They are the right people, and that it is just this line of thinking that's very corrosive.
Well, this is really bombing, Zachary. This is really bombing because the two of us are agreeing.
No,
Well, it's
we
not
agree on a
bombing,
lot,
but it's
clearly.
actually not bombing because what the reality is, without people like you, nobody would hear from me. And that's
100%.
what they want, right? They've assassinated me,
Yeah.
right? Because they took me out of the classroom, will never allow me back in. My regulatory body wants to cancel me for life and will succeed. And my employer has made sure I'll never get back. And my union has abandoned me or in the process of abandoning me because I'm anti woke, I'm anti propaganda, And so, but they pretend, they pretended this long to standing with me. So I've gone through for 4.5 years just going, I'm just this nobody who sits at home all day long.
Yeah.
But then there's social media. There's people like you interviewing me. There's people that publish my articles. There's people that read my posts on X. And there's people who write to me or phone me. And all of a sudden I'm feeling, oh my gosh, without the Zacharies of this world, a young person who's actually willing to stand up because I have kids and they have their friends and I have students and they have their friends and I know so many young people and guess how many I can count in one hand who is willing to say the things that you're saying to me.
Very few, if any, I
Almost,
imagine.
it could be
Yeah.
in one hand. It's just
Yeah.
nobody. Everybody's going, well, it's not going to help my career. It's going to hurt me.
Yeah.
I'll get fired. I support you. Most of the people who follow me on X don't officially follow me because they don't want to be caught out or they
Yeah.
have some strange name. And every once in a while you get to know somebody and the person says, oh, by the way, I live near you. I also teach where you teach, but I can't tell you my name.
Yeah, I know it's very sad, but so true. And I've had even people like just a few weeks ago, I think it was right after the Charlie Kirk assassination, or I think actually that day, I had someone who I used to go to elementary school with reach out to me to say that he's doing really well in life, but he has his group of friends, and that he appreciated that I was making content like this because it made him feel that someone he used to go to school with is of a very similar mindset. And I've described it really since then that I genuinely believe it's a silent majority across the country on all these issues. Like you said, whether it's the LGBTQ, whatever, like a lot of the indigenous stuff we deal with now with the residential schools. For the states, it was really like the Black Lives Matter movement at the same time, immigration issues, all these things. People are just afraid of the social repercussions. But I genuinely believe because people are courteous and respectful in how they speak out. They're just being honest. If they're able to be open, I think people will be really awakened as to how many people see the same way that they do. And part of my belief, like when you even mentioned before, like when you spoke out against the schools, that you had, as sad as it is, even family members come after you. I had the exact same thing, both as despicable as it was when I did a small little commentary on the Charlie Kirk assassination. I had one family member coming at me like a rabid dog for that. And same thing for the residential school episode last week. And I just think like in some ways it's sad that if you don't like what I have to say, that's great, but you're spending so much time on my content being hateful that it's just bad energy for you, and it really is sad. But it's just they're wackos in a lot of way, and that's really what it boils down to, as sad as it is to say. But it is just unfortunate that this is what you deal with. But I think for a lot of people in media, people tend to look at them as though they're cartoon characters or like characters on a soap opera. They don't humanize them, and they're in fact very dehumanized. And so, for anyone who genuinely knows me, we can disagree on topics and still be friends. Like, they're even some of my best friends, like with anyone in the world. They don't agree eye to eye on 100% of things, but that's part of being an adult and being mature. That 70-80% of your worldview is very much in line. So, that's how you get along and want to spend time with one another. But disagreeing is how you can grow and learn more. Like, it's just that's part of the growth of it. So I think the biggest thing is for anyone that people see online is try to remember that we all are human at the end of the day. And if you were to sit down and talk to this person face to face, would you still be saying the things that you're saying? And would you carry yourself in the way that you are? Because people just tend to dehumanize those they see online.
So gosh, I feel I'm listening to a prophet compared to my age, man. But I just love you just say you're a special person, but it also takes the courage. And and part of the courage that I have is to be wrong.
Yeah.
So if someone were to say to me tomorrow, Jim, they just did excavations and they found 215 bodies and they found that they were murdered and they've traced them back to teachers at the school. And what do you think now? I would say without any hesitation, I would say I was completely wrong. I'm
Yep.
incredibly embarrassed by that. And I'm going to devote the rest of my life to getting word out about what really took place at
Yeah.
that Campbellton residential school. Because I'm someone who believes that if I have any purpose, professionally, um, is I'm more than anything else, I'm a history teacher. It's just to get history right. That where's that courage and where is that humility in school authorities?
Yeah.
Why
That's
haven't they
exactly it.
long before 4.5 years and they still haven't done it? Why don't they just go up to the kids and say, look, kids, for 4.5 years, we've been lying to you about all the race stuff, all the indigenous stuff, the stolen land, and this literature has to be removed because it's no good. And we said the things about history aren't true. And you know, that we're into talking about your sexuality, and we really shouldn't have. You know, it's not something, you know, if you have a different pronoun, you know, it's not something we really should be advertising. If you think you're this or that, like they're just never going to do it. They're just going to go on to something else, and they're going to, and particularly residential schools, they're just going to say blah blah blah. You know, you're right. You know, well, yes, yes, absolutely, yeah. They didn't find any bodies, but
Yeah,
but
that's
you
always
know,
it.
some people that said they did, and that needed to be examined. They'll never come clean with kids.
No.
What is it? You know, I raised 3 kids. And whether I did a good job or a bad job, others can judge. But in my own heart, I did a good job, as did my wife. And the reason I did a good job is I did my best to be honest with them. You know, that's the most important value of all is honesty. You know, I
Yeah.
know there's love and everything, but honest. If I'm telling them I love them, I'm honest. If I'm telling them I'm mad at them, I'm honest. If I'm telling them they got to go to bed now, I'm honest. Like, why is it's not just truth that's gone from schools, honest and universities, honesty. How can you trust anyone who's being that dishonest to you?
No, that's exactly it. And like you said, when it comes to speaking on any of these ideas, it's the courage to be wrong. I said the same thing on the last episode, and I'll say the same thing here. Just as you said, I'm very libertarian in a lot of economics, but I would put the tax dollars towards excavating all the potential grave sites. I think just as a matter of pursuing truth, as I said before, and I'll say again, if there are bodies there, then we need to know as a matter of truth, because then it is part of our history. And like I said, we have to address it at the helm. But at the same time, if there's not bodies there, we also need to know that. And we can't just go off ground penetrating radar, whatever systems they have, and just kind of believe, well, we think there are, so let's just say there are. Like we need to
Can I
know.
disagree with that? Can I disagree with
Yeah,
that?
of course,
And
go.
and, you, and at any time you can just give me the hook,
You're good.
push delete or whatever. But I'm disagreeing with you, but with incredible respect,
Yeah.
incredible respect. And this is why what I disagree with. I don't. And again, 99.9% what you're saying, man, you're just so much ahead of me intellectually. But I disagree about digging. I
Okay.
don't think you can dig. There are no bodies there, Zachary. So what are you going to do to the people who have been duped on that reserve?
Yeah. No, that's where I guess is that point. It's just proving one way or the other what is actually
That's why
true.
they're not digging. They're
No,
not digging
100%. That's
now.
why.
They're not because they're protecting. The whole idea was if you have indigenous people, generally speaking, it's not true. The ones near where I live who are massively wealthy, like they mean they own the parts of Vancouver or whatever,
Yeah.
real estate, and they don't have to work because all they do is just they
Yeah.
go to casinos all day long. But which they too own, right? I mean, they're just
Yeah.
full of money. But your average indigenous person hasn't had an easy time, you know, in life so far compared to people in my family, for example.
Yeah.
So what would I do to indigenous people if I took a shovel in sincerity and went to Kamloops and dug up and found out, which I know to be true, because there was no kids ever missing. You can't have 215 kids missing. And no one ever talked about it. It was right in the center of the school, in the center
Yeah.
of the reserve, in the center of the community. And the police aren't going to ever dig because they know there's nothing there. Obviously, they would have investigated. So if they felt there was mass child murder, there's nobody there. And so what's going to happen is for the rest of time, our time, people are going to be making fun of indigenous people in Kamloops for their big whopper. And they still
Fair.
have a sign up saying 215. I mean, so they're locked, and so do other reserves. They're locked in this. The best thing for us to do is to move on. But you can't move on from it until the people who control our media and our government say we don't believe there. We know now there are no bodies there. There's
Yeah.
nothing to lead us to there. The suspicions that are there's nothing substantive about them. We're not going to dig. We're going to leave these people alone, and we're going to move on, and we're going to do things to help, and not just Indigenous people. We're going to help all Canadians anywhere who don't have good drinking water.
Yeah.
who don't have a good education, who can't pay for their post-secondary education, who don't have a roof over their heads. Forget the group stuff. We're going to look at Canadians and think that we're all part of one family. All of us pay taxes, should pay taxes as adults, and all of us should benefit from those taxes.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. And that's why I guess if we could, in the more ideal sense, move on and we like I think that's the biggest thing. Even when it comes to like reconciliation, say like, well, what are we reconciling over? Is to be able to know the true history in that sense, so then we can properly move forward. But I think that's where the biggest dividing line is now, is it's just two sets of groups really working from two different sets of facts. And that's until we can kind of fix that divide, then it's gonna be hard to move on. So I completely hear what you're saying though, and would agree that if we could move on as a group together and go forward in unity, that is obviously what everyone would like to do. And I mean,
And we have to do that. We have to do
100%.
it and are going to do it, but we can't do it by digging, and we can't do it by having these elites continuing to lie to us about all sorts of things. And what did they do today? Gave 12, they gave more, conditional 12 months house arrest to Mira Leach and
Yeah,
Chris Barber.
I
Like
saw
they're
that. Yep.
still jailing dissidents. They're still keeping me out of teaching. I mean, they're still going after anybody who they're leaving the real criminals out there on the street. You could have a guy, hit a woman in Vancouver on East Hastings, sent her to
Yeah.
hospital for permanent brain damages. And that person, if the person's black or indigenous or something, will be out that after the same afternoon. And then they take the people like me who are the truth tellers, in the sense that I'm educated and I say things that are backed up by facts. And they're
Yeah.
taking me and they're just hitting me over the head repeatedly until I eventually, commit suicide. One of the people that I started with and 4.5 years ago, when I lost everything, and my wife lost her salary at the same time, and I wasn't an easy time. But I met a guy and a few others, and we started an organization, and it was called Lighthouse. And many of those people, I don't want to mention names right now,
Yeah, of
but
course.
many of those people went on to become successful in the movement of trying to, because I'll forget some people. I just
Yeah,
say
no
that
worries. I completely get that.
one of them, one of the key members, was a principal. And guess how he ended up reacting? He killed himself. So don't think for a second when you look at a confident person like me, and I'm confident, and I'll take on anybody anywhere on any subject.
Yeah.
And but people aren't giving me the chance, but I will. I'm a strong, confident individual. And I took on my father a lot. He lost a lot too. But my point is I'm strong. I can take it, but nobody is going to take on me. But that doesn't mean that if you cut me, I won't bleed. That
Yep.
doesn't mean that I don't hurt inside, that I can no longer teach children when all I wanted to do was tell them the truth. It does hurt, Zachary. It
Yeah.
does hurt that I am the enemy of the state for wanting to try and get it right for kids.
No, that's exactly it, right? And that's why they got rid of Socrates, because he was corrupting the youth, as they put it. And that's the reality of what we're facing right here. And I think even to your point, it's like I think it's so amazing to try and address the virtue signaling issue, because the people who purport these ideas, they like to feel good in themselves, as we discussed before. But the real issues for Indigenous people who still live on reserves today and face genuine hardships, they don't get any actual attention. These do-gooders feel great about themselves, but nothing is actually done to help these people. And again, I keep referencing the same professor, but one of the things, again, we talk about assimilation, how we can do better to help everyone. An idea I got from John Stossel, like a reporter down in the United States, I think was very true when dealing with even the Indians and reserves there, is that they don't have true private property rights. And so not only do you have incentive issues there, but on a very basic matter of fact, if you don't have a deed to what is designated as your land, then you don't have any way to get a loan against it to then invest and do more, whether it's to start a business or develop that land. And so there's many ways I think that like more private markets to truly allow Indigenous people to become assimilated into the larger workforce and larger market could be done. But there's so many ways they're handicapped by being on these reserves, unfortunately.
Yeah, and thank you for understanding my message.
Yeah.
That I'm a teacher who, of course, works just as hard for Indigenous kids as other kids, not more. I work more for needy kids.
Yeah,
I
of
don't care
course.
about their ancestry. I don't even know their ancestry. and I don't want to know their ancestry unless they tell me about it, and we can talk about it. Like
Yeah,
I just wanted to, but I have been on reserves, and I just love once again what you're saying, Zachary. I've been on reserves, and I have seen the drugs. My nephew died after being sold drugs by an indigenous pusher. My nephew was educated for a time at an indigenous school in Agassiz, British Columbia. So his friends were indigenous, and he died at their hands of fentanyl. And so, what you want to do, and of course, indigenous kids are dying at a rate much greater
yeah,
than non-indigenous kids of fentanyl and other, bar, other narcotics. And
yeah,
so it's really um, psychotics. So it's a serious thing. So they give all sorts of money to Kamloops, knowing there's nobody in the ground there. And what did the pan do? They built a healing center. They over top of where there could be graves because they're saying there are graves here.
of course.
The healing center so they can heal, which really what they're saying is so you can build more trauma and then
Yep,
heal in this endless cycle of you're never going to make your lives better. But we're going to continue in this endless cycle of
yep,
trauma healing, and we're never going to give you what you need to have a good life. And the best way to have a good life is obviously don't look back in the past, but you look forward. What can
yeah,
you do today to make your tomorrow better? What can you do to make your today better? And maybe it involves not drinking that substance, or maybe it's going out and looking for work. Maybe it's giving a hug to your grandmother. Like I don't know how to, I don't know better than anybody else, but I know there's things that even I can do, this unemployed loser old teacher, that I can do daily to feel worth it.
yeah. It's
I can just
100%.
stop, and I can stop as I'm driving, as I did just before getting on with you, and talk to two older people on a bench. And one, the woman was looked to be about 90, and she said bye to me about three times. She couldn't believe that I stopped to talk to her. But my point is, that's what you do. You build people up. You don't
Yeah,
keep telling them that their ancestors were raped and tortured and murdered by the white people around you.
yes.
What a horrible prescription for indigenous people.
No, that's exactly it. And in some ways, it's not surprising that we get here, especially when you have this, as you talk about like victim mindset constantly pushed on them. When you're in this environment that's constantly doom and gloom and you don't see a positive way out, no matter what group you're part of or who you are, for a lot of people, as terrible as it is, turning to alcohol and other substances like drugs is the way they try to cope with it. And it's just, it's a path to absolutely nowhere. And so you're right, trying to instill a positive mentality, especially at the young age, for when people get older, is such an important thing to do. And it is just sad to see that these negative mindsets are going to constantly, it seems as though, continue to be pushed on Indigenous people.
Is there any one thing just before I leave? I've got another commitment, and I
No
worry that I've
worries.
talked too much. Is there any sort of final clothing thing? Was there something I didn't address? Was there?
I think we discussed it all, especially as going to history to maybe even what could be done for the future and everything going forward. I think we discussed everything that I wanted to touch upon here. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you, Jim, and having you on. I would also love we could do another episode later because I studied history at university, so there's so much regarding whether it's Canadian American or world history. We could talk a lot about that, so that could be another fun second episode.
Well, I love this. It was you've given me a lot of great ideas. Actually, I mean, you strengthened me, and I'm going to make some noise for some time to come because that's the role I've been given. And so, if the people thought that they were going to people said to me, "Oh, McMurtry, you fight back against the hill, my own union. It's the hill you're going to die on." Does
Yeah,
it look like I'm dying? No, no. I'm getting stronger because I'm doing something right. And what that
exactly.
is I'm telling kids the truth, and there's a power that comes from that, and I feel that power, and you're doing the same. So I'm proud of you, man.
Thank you very much, Jim. I appreciate it a lot. It really does mean a lot. So thank you, and thank you again for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
For me too.
Take care.